I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
Modernity has created promises that it has no ability to keep. What this means is that we're a society of disembedded individuals, stuck in the impossible situation of being alone together. And what was understood as emancipation has proved to be a form of isolation. It is important to understand that what I am telling you is not simply a cultural history. It's a description of the story that shapes every single person that you know. This is why there is a rise in mental illness. It's absolutely concurrent with the disembedding of the individual, because individuals can't constitute themselves by the very nature of the case. Subjectivity cannot sustain its own weight. We need others to tell us. But we've been given an ethical mandate by the Enlightenment that tells us that that's immoral, that nobody should constrain us.
All right. So it's Spencer Hess here, not with Lori Johnson today, but we have a guest, Jakob Hanschu, here for episode 3 of Dustbowl Diatribes. I'll let Jakob introduce himself.
Thanks for having me on, Spencer and virtual Lori. I'm a grad student at Washington University in St. Louis, where I study social anthropology. I also have a master's in critical theory and politics that I did at the University of Nottingham. And my dissertation project focuses on nutrient pollution and agricultural political economy in Iowa. So I guess that makes me relevant or something. So I don't know if there's anything else I should add to my introduction, but.
Yeah, I guess we can talk about the class later in the episode that you'll be teaching. But yeah, so we wanted to bring you on to follow up with episode 2, where we talked about this Christian typological idea of spoiling Egypt and how like secular ideas or ideas foreign to the Christian tradition can still be relevant and healthy for Christians to consider and try and apply in their own lives. And so you, more than anyone else we know, would be an expert in talking about 2 key concepts, metabolic rift and the abstract domination of capital. So we brought you on to talk about that. Any opening thoughts?
I am opposed to being called an expert, which has to do with my like Adornian commitments to epistemology or something that's supposed to sound more sophisticated than I am. But yeah, I think I really enjoyed the second episode. I think this makes just total sense. And it's strange that most folks haven't already embraced this in the Christian tradition, because it seems like it's what the church has been doing like for all of its existence, at least certain elements of it. So yeah, I don't know so we're starting with metabolic rift.
It makes sense to me to start there. What is metabolic rift?
So like, I guess it comes from Marx, but it's been picked up, if anybody's really interested in it. John Bellamy Foster, JB Foster, has a bunch of stuff that he's written on it, like Marx's ecology. So it's an idea that stems from Marx, especially it's near the end of Capital Volume 1, but then also Capital Volume 3, that argues that due to the inherent laws of capitalist political economy, what you get is a rift, or some people call it a shift. If you're Jason Moore, it doesn't really matter to me which one you call it. in the metabolism, in what was previously like the natural, scare quotes abounding, metabolism of whether it's water, nutrients, anything like this. I mean, the natural metabolic processes of of the world, whether it's, I mean, the best example I think is through guano, which is like bird shit, basically. I don't know if I can swear on this. It's bird shit.
Yeah. Or bats. Are bats considered birds?
Bats or bat shit, I guess. I don't know. But in that regard, I mean, if we want to use bats, then I mean, we could say that in the mid 1800s, folks in Europe and America were batshit crazy, in the sense that there was so in Europe and especially in the US, which is linked to other stuff, but there was declining rates of soil fertility. So part of this is actually linked, at least in the American South, to the fact that the textile mills that are like famous because of the Industrial Revolution and Engels' book on Manchester, like 32% of all like the incomes of the South was like from cotton exports to Europe. And because there was such a high demand for cotton, what you got is these farmers would plant the crops until the soil in that area declines, and then they'd go to another area where the soil is better. So there's this increasing like frontier fertility or something. Mm-hmm. And it was a big problem because eventually you run out of land, which happened eventually. And so there was kind of like a crisis of fertility. So like, what do? We've depleted all of our soils because people like to wear cotton clothes or something, which isn't actually it, but more because it was demanded it was demanded by these cotton mills, and it was being sold. So like capitalists could make a huge buck.
Mm-hmm. And there were just a bunch of consenting buyers that wanted
exactly
that cotton clothing. So who's to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I did my master's right in Nottingham, which was like lace. It was like the lace capital of the world or something, which is, there's been some accounts, I guess, that also it was in this idea of like, there was like a new aesthetics of consumption that went along with this. But of course, you don't have any of this if, folks can still like produce their own means of subsistence and existence.
So
yeah,
could we back it up real quick to part of that story?
Yeah.
So you're painting a picture where in the American South, they break the sod or clear the forests that are there. They start doing agriculture, but they're not practicing sort of organic or regenerative methods as we would call them now. So
yeah, because it's not profitable, basically.
Mm-hmm. So you basically have them extracting the nutritional value from the soil till they've reached this marginal point of returns where you just sort of move on from that land, move west and mine that land. Is that what you're describing?
Yeah, you deplete the soil of all its nutrients, because basically those nutrients are, whatever. I don't know how plants work. The roots take them out of the soil and they go up in the cotton plant. But then if you send that cotton away, never to return again to like wherever like northern Alabama, or I don't know where this is, pick any spot. Then this is why it's called a rift, right? Because those nutrients, instead of being consumed on site and then through disposal returning to that plot of land from where they were extracted, you get kind of this like one-way linear transformation of the material flows that go from site of extraction to production to consumption and then are disposed elsewhere. I wrote it down because it's just like one of these tidbits of history that actually like reveals the irrationality of like the capitalist system. So it was in the 1830s or so, when there's this crisis of fertility and folks are like, we need something to restore the nutrients to the soil. And there was like a bone meal craze as like we'll do this through bone meal. So what you get in Europe actually is like people like in hordes, people are exhuming bodies from Napoleonic battlefields and grinding up the bones and applying them to their fields, which is just like, right, this is absurd, but also like slightly hilarious. So that's the tidbit I wanted to share. So you can see, like, I guess how big, you know, this crisis of fertility was, that people were literally like digging up bodies and grinding them up and then putting them on their fields, which is like disgusting, but I guess also like somewhat natural. Yeah. Sure. So but then you
and it's Lori and I talk a lot about this quote from Jesus about we swallow camels and we choke on gnats. That it's easier to exhume your ancestors than it is to realize that we have an insane global market, and that perhaps we need, at least with agriculture, we need to find a more sustainable way to do things.
Yeah, right. Which for me, this comes back to this. I mean, it's like the classic, I think, method of critical theory, which is instead of diagnosing just the symptoms, right, you're actually trying to like uncover the illness that is bringing them about. And so they are exhuming bodies, but this wasn't. It actually didn't turn out to be very feasible. I mean, I can't imagine why, or like that efficient for them. So there was the turn to guano, which was imported from typically South America. So you get this metabolic rift in that to keep. So you're growing whatever crop, cotton, let's say, on your field. You harvest the cotton, you send it off. Okay, there's a rift created. How do you feel that? How do you fill the rift? And which is the lack of soil nutrients. You import guano and apply guano, and then you can grow the cotton again and export it, you know, to the mills, to the mills in Britain again. Then you have a rift again, right? So this is just an ongoing thing, and eventually guano. I mean, because like it's bird droppings, so birds have to produce these droppings. We were consuming more of it than was being produced. I mean, it was, it eventually ran out, so to speak. And, but also, I mean, part of it was that it was running out. Part of it that there were these scientific advancements, again, advancements, scare quotes, sorry, in like the Haber-Bosch process, where you synthesize fertilizer using nitrogen gas, which is like super abundant. It's like the most abundant gas in our atmosphere. So now instead of guano, you like go down to, I don't know, some market or something, and you buy a bag of NPK from the, like, I don't know, Monsanto doesn't, I don't know, whoever you want, name them.
Cargill.
Yeah, Cargill, this, you know, you go buy this bag of fertilizer and then you just like apply it to your land. But then it's used up again, right? Because you're going to harvest the cotton and send it to the mills in Manchester or wherever. Which, okay, that's neat. The metabolic rift is an ecological theory, which shows that, you know, it has mainly to do with these, like, you know, the nutrients in the soil. It's like with the natural conditions and resources. Mm-hmm. But I think that it becomes more interesting just like when we think about like it also has a social implication, right? So like one of the major social implications is that this began with guano, is that instead of managing soil fertility on farm, which is the way that humans have done it for like most of preceding history.
And could you real quick describe roughly what that would look like?
Well, I mean, so you would know better than me, but this would be like, you harvest whatever the vegetables from your garden and you go and put the scraps from eating back on the garden, right? Or you feed them to your animals. You feed, you know, whatever, you harvest corn and feed it to your animal, and then you let, you know, your cows pasture in what will eventually be a cornfield. So this is this like closed loop, which is somewhat romantic, but I mean, I don't think it's that. I think it is actually like fairly accurate about the way that things used to function. So
Okay.
um,
Sure.
this is
And I would
yeah,
just add
yeah.
cover crop to that too as well.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, these like planting legumes that like will deposit nitrogen in the soil for you. All of this type of stuff is it like was farming as a closed circuit in terms of fertility. And early ways in which this was done actually is like and I think there's archaeological record of this. I can't be sure, so don't quote me on it, I guess. But like horse and animal droppings from the city when they were like swept off the street or whatever, like deposited at like a pile outside the city, which was like a commons that then like the peasant farmers would go and take and apply to their fields. Right. So there was this like loop between town and country, and also like within the farm itself. And with the metabolic rift, all of this gets disrupted. So instead of this like on-farm fertility management, you now have to like go to somebody and buy like pre-packaged soil fertility or whatever we want to call it. I mean, it's basically like, it is pre-packaged nutrients, or, especially in the form of fertilizer. And then you apply this. So it locks in the farmer. It locks the farmer into a relation of dependence on off-farm interests. So the farmer, so long as they shift, because like in agricultural history, what this resulted in is like you also get the separation of raising livestock and raising crops, right? And if you don't have crops and livestock on the same land, then there's that eat the corn, shit the corn out, fertilize what will be corn, can't take place, right?
Sure. Wendell Berry talks in The Unsettling of America about, it's like we took a solution, which was animals that poop, fertility, and crops that need fertility and that can feed the animals. We took like a dualistic solution and we split it and created two problems.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because now you have to not only feed the animals but also feed the crops. And yeah, so this is what you get. You get my advisor Glenn Stone, who, like, shout out, is coming out with a book in June called The Agricultural Dilemma, which everybody should buy and read if you care about these things. Refer to this as like buying the farm. It was his way of characterizing industrial agriculture, is that the farm is an operation that has to be bought over and over again anew because of all of the off-farm inputs that are now required in an industrial agricultural setting. And fertilizer is the first appropriation of previously on-farm processes by off-farm interests. Usually, like, whatever you can call them, capitalist interests, if you like, if you want to be like a, banner waving Marxist or something.
Sure.
So
Followed by, would you agree, like genetically modified seeds and increasingly expensive farming equipment?
Yes.
Combines.
Yes. So these are the big three appropriations that Glenn, for example, outlines in his book. And this has been, I think this is like usually it's like taken as being accepted, is that it's fertilizer, hybrid seeds to GMOs, but hybrid seeds beginning in the 40s especially, and then increasingly mechanized farm implements that have a greater reliance on like capital investment than labor time, right? So if you're good, like a tractor can do the work of whatever we want to say, 20 folks, but it requires much more capital investment up front. So this like continual move away from labor towards capital. And the first of these is the guano, or the art of guano, which becomes synthetic fertilizers. Yeah, so I don't know. Hopefully that's like clear as I don't know. There's like a joke or something, like clear as, I don't know, fertilizer polluted water or something.
Runny bird poop.
Yeah, or yeah, runny bird poop. So do you have any questions on that one? I'm checking the note that I had here about, I was was like, oh, there's some things that you just have to mention in talking about the metabolic rift.
Okay.
So
let me rephrase and try and summarize what you're saying to make sure we're all on the same page. You're describing a situation where previously, let's say before modernity, industrialization, capitalism, you had major natural limits on how humans farmed and then the societies we created out of that agriculture. So put another way, you had farms, but there was an awareness that yes, some of our product is going to go to a city somewhere, but we're also going to try and return the maximum amount of fertility from that city. And compared to, on the other side of globalization and industrialization, there becomes an awareness of like, oh, I should just try and maximize my production, sell as much as possible so I can carry the note on my land. And when I deplete the soil, well, hopefully there's a monger of bird shit from South America that I can use. I'm going to need money to pay him because he's trying to make a profit. And I'm going to try and put that in my soil. And then I'm going to try and convert that to more product, try and sell that to someone. And so you're caught up in all of these like loops of commerce and material transactions. Is that kind of what you're describing?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that's what I mean. I think, right, what makes it way more interesting than thinking about the metabolic rift just as like capitalist society exists and it's bad for the environment because, it moves nutrients from one place to another and doesn't replace them, is thinking about it socially, which is what this is like what you're saying. This is what you're going towards, is that like the metabolic rift isn't just, it's not just like it's not the farmer, right? Or, like who's deciding to like this is what I'm going to do. It's not like a moral question of like, oh, if farmers would just like learn to be better farmers and like not be so greedy or something, then this would be solved. And it's like so naive, I think, to think this, but it's also just like disrespectful of like.
And why would you say it's naive? Because I think that naivete is more or less the American common sense.
Right. Yeah. Well, because the American common sense is a liberal common sense, which puts that like we're all rational individuals who make, who are like fairly autonomous and make decisions according to like these goals and interests that we have.
Mm-hmm. And with also a good amount of information so that we're legitimately consenting into these transactions and these wider systems.
Right. And then it's like, oh, if you made a bad decision, it's like probably just because you didn't have perfect information. And if we all had perfect information, we would be perfect consumers who like never drink from straws and like always, like, I don't know, like mail our crap back to farmers when we eat organically, or something like this. But this is just not the case. And
it is not the case because
this is the next concept, I guess, that we wanted to talk about, which is abstract domination. And abstract domination, I mean, it comes from Postone, but it's also in Marx, and there's like a whole lineage in which this comes. But I think that I would just say that it's domination by capitalist social relations and the imperatives of capitalist production and exchange.
So what does that mean?
Yeah, so freed from individuals. So this is what it's trying to get away from something like personal or direct domination. So this would be like I don't know, like traditional understandings of domination, I guess, where it's I'm going to decide to do X, and because you're weaker than me or whatever, I'm going to dominate. Which it has nothing to do. It's not anything like this, though this often will take place due to abstract domination. But in relation, so capitalist social relations have to do with labor. So that's where I guess I'll start, and then we'll talk about exchange. But under capitalism, all value is produced through the process of labor. And but like in that laboring process, the labor has to be conceptualized as abstract, because otherwise what you get is a bunch of different use values. So in producing things for exchange value, labor is always already going to be abstract labor. Mm-hmm. Is that good so far?
I mean, I'm following you, but I'm pretty steeped in this stuff. So what, in a less jargony way, when you use these terms like abstract labor, what makes abstract labor different than the concrete labor that everybody understands, like when they go to their job and they work 5 to 10 hours a day?
Yeah, right. So yeah. Well, so I think it's useful here. Or did you have something to add? Sorry.
No, I was just asking because most people, I think part of what's so hard to understand this is we act in a system in which we are putting out abstract labor, but we don't experience our labor as abstract.
Right. Yeah. So this is
just like we don't experience our domination as abstract. We don't view the Wall Street or the owner of our company as our boss. We view our boss as our boss, and he's the one who's oppressing us because he's the one in the flesh telling us what to do.
Right. Yeah. So like, first of all, I will just say that like our labor is abstract, and we're like contributing to the abstract domination of capital, whether we know it or not, mm-hmm. whether we like it or not. Mm-hmm. And now, so to differentiate between concrete labor and abstract labor, I think it's useful to like think about this in the terms of the universal and the in particular. So like concrete labor is particular. So like, you know, me sitting at my computer, clacking on my keyboard all day to do stuff that is, you know, whatever, writing or teaching or anything like this, or you, you know, planting and harvesting out in the at your urban farm. These would be forms of particular labor, right? And like which you can think about, I guess, just in terms of like their specificity, which are contrasted with universal labor. So universal labor is like the idea that all of the labor in the world, it's like an average value. I think is probably the easiest way to understand that. All the particular labors of the world, the average value for a particular task is abstract labor. So like if I'm working at my computer at a rate of, I don't know, you know, whatever, 100 words per minute, let's just say, in terms of, because that might make it easy. Like if I'm writing and that's my form of labor and I'm 100 words per minute, then yeah, that's my particular, right? But the value of the product that I'm producing is not determined by like my own expended labor time, but by this, I mean, what Marx would call socially necessary labor time, which is the value of like, if everybody in the world was sitting at their computer typing away, maybe the average is like 90 words per minute, right? That's the rate at which they're producing this product. That would be the universal. So in my product, it's not valued actually according to me. Like I'm producing at 100 words per minute, whatever. It would be valued at this 90 words per minute of the socially necessary labor time. I don't know. Does that make that distinction a little bit more clear?
I think so. I mean, I still don't fully grasp it, and I think it's because it's partly so hard to grasp this abstraction. But would it be fair to say like a step along understanding what you're talking about is coming to see, like, you know, let's say I do a job where I make $30 an hour. Well, it's not like every hour, whatever I accomplish adds up to earning that $30 an hour.
Right.
That it's a kind of average abstraction where the market and whoever's paying me is betting that my hourly output is worth $30 an hour.
Yeah, right. Because basically, like if you're like more skilled or less skilled, right, this is how you'd get the shift. Because like the market would determine, like, if you're more skilled, you're going to get more done in less time, right? So your particular labor would be worth more. But your particular labor as someone who's more skilled would be worth more because of the difference between that and like the average labor. Does that make like, I think that's maybe one of the best ways of thinking about it is, like, if you're a more efficient worker, you're more skilled, whatever it is, because you get more done in the same amount of time as like the average abstract universal laborer would, you would get paid more. So that's one way of thinking about it, I think. So.
Okay, fair enough. And I'm still not sure I fully get it, but I think it does, at the very least, I think, at least I intuit that it's good to have a kind of dissociation between this naive belief that whatever I earn, whatever income I have, is because somehow or other I've earned it. Like, this is, we tend to take it for granted that I've earned it. But
right, yeah, that someone is just like out there like deciding like, oh, I'm gonna pay Spencer this today just because that's my like decision. It's not disconnected, or, you know, or I guess we could say it is connected to the social relations of production and the broader like social functioning of the economy. It's not just, you know, a boss saying I'm going to pay you X, like as if it's some like arbitrary thing.
Right. And maybe here, I mean, tell me if this is a good example. One time I was talking to a farmer, and I was raising some questions along these lines, and questioning how we know what things are worth, and whether or not he's a relatively successful farmer, you know, like 10,000 plus acres in Western Kansas, or at least owns the land. And he was trying to justify basically his income and saying, well, I worked hard for this. I made the right money moves. I took the risks. That's a huge justification for these things, that the capitalists are taking risks and sort of venturing out into this unknown and like creating order out of chaos. He was trying to justify basically his income because he'd earned it. And the market has validated that. And I said, okay, fair enough. Do you think you worked hard? Because he inherited some of his land and learned farming from his dad. I said, do you work harder than your dad did, who also farmed? And he looked at, like, that stopped the discussion, because he was like, no, I don't work more than my dad. And I'm like, but how much wealthier are you? He's like, I don't know, 2 to 4 times as wealthy. And I'm like, and is that because you worked harder, or because you were the beneficiary of historical development and a subsidy regime and things like that? So do you think that kind of is that a picture of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think it gets complex when you, like, the example you gave, I think is complex in the sense that when you work in subsidies, right, like it automatically is going to become, yeah, but I
right,
think, yeah,
now we're adding in rents and things like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I guess like it's terrible that I didn't think about this actually when I was like, when you first asked me about abstract labor, but like it's abstract labor is what is required if labor is to be made a commodity. Right. Because
otherwise we would just have incommensurate, we wouldn't have like a universal currency with which to value things. Is that right?
Yeah. So like in a certain way, the notion of abstract labor is like, it's that, like it's the unit of measurement that makes Spencer working and Jakob working commensurable in an amount which tends to be dollars, but like behind the dollars is actually this abstract labor that, you know, like Spencer working on an urban farm is worth like 10 units of abstract labor. Jakob working is 5 because, you know, I probably would just kill all the lettuce or something. But what makes this like what makes these things equitable or commensurable, I guess is the better term, is that, you know, I am X number of abstract labor units, and so are you. It basically it's like a universal that's required. Yeah, like you said, to make things commensurable. So, but I think like thinking about it as a commodity, right? That's shows then, I guess, how, which I guess would be the next step, right? Like after abstract labor is like how that ties into the production process and the circulation process.
And so how does it?
So yeah, so like this is so this is the abstract domination bit. So it has, and I wrote this down so I didn't forget them because my mind is scattered, as you can tell. There's the law of value, the law of competition, and the law of capitalist accumulation. And these things function together. So the law of value, this has to do with everything has to be reduced to this abstract labor. That like under capitalism, everything has to be reduced to it. Otherwise, it can't be exchanged. You have to have commensurability. And this commensurability is arrived at through the reduction of like particular labor or particular commodity, right, with a certain use value, everything else, to an exchange value, which is the process of commoditization or commodification. So that's the first way in which abstract domination functions.
Right.
Because it reduces all the particularities to universals.
Right. So I can theoretically go to a mall and with the same $100, I could get food or a video game or a down payment on a diamond ring.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to buy the same product with the same amount of money. I mean, or different products with the same amount of money. Sorry. Sure. But then, but this is linked to the production process and the exchange process. So like, this is so complicated. It's like somewhat complicated because it's not like intuitive, right? But okay, so when you're producing in a capitalist society, you're producing commodities, you're producing products for exchange, right? So the use values don't actually matter. It's all about the exchange values. And
real quick, by that you mean the value our society places onto goods is not what they're actually useful for. It's just whatever they exchange for.
Yeah.
There's this kind of pragmatic or almost nominalist thing where how do we know what things are worth? Well, because somebody bought it at that price. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, partly. Yeah, that's part of it. But then so this would be there's like all of these Marxist debates, which are just like both tiring and immensely annoying between like usually like two bros who one of whom wants to claim like, you know, like they read their, you know, Marx /Bible/ Quran, which is all it like take whatever religious text, and Marx is this for like these bros, right, that they read it better and understood it better than the other, which I just don't have time for, or like, and it's also just like not interesting. You know, this is an aside again, but like the spoils of Egypt concept like should be applied also to like Marxist analysis. Like what if instead of just like being, you know, so like navel gazing, Marxists like took some other things that have been developed that would be useful to them.
Sure.
Like Christian ethics, maybe. So
sure. Yeah. But they'd have to get over their sort of OCD obsession with like the labor theory of value functioning as like the sinner's prayer that they can.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Or like the creed, you know, I what would we call it? It would be like I guess he was in London when he was writing this. It'd be like the British Library Creed, you know, or you know, the like location. But I forgot. So before I swerved into this, what were we going? Oh, we were trying to. Yeah.
We talked about abstract labor, and then we talked about sort of like exchange value as like finally determining what commodities are worth.
Right. Yeah. So anyways, in these debates, there's like a side that tends to emphasize the exchange aspect, where it's the value of things comes about solely through their exchange. And this is why we get abstraction, because things have to be made commensurable in exchange. Which is very market focused, which is strange because humans have been doing this for like ever, right?
Mhm.
Like we've been exchanging, I mean, before the advent of capitalism. Sorry, I was going to try to find a quote on this old thing that I had looked at. But anyways, yeah. But exchange doesn't make like yes, that's part of it, but we've been doing this forever. So then you get into like, I want to avoid like Marxist jargon if I can, but also like the exchange process imprints on the production process, and the production process imprints on the exchange process. And what I mean is that if you're going to be exchanging commodities, which are products that are commensurable, that you can buy a diamond ring or, you know, part of a car or whatever for the same amount, right? Then this is going to, this eventually like imprints on that production process itself, because those commodities that are going to be exchanged, or I mean, I guess those products that are going to be exchanged as commodities have to be produced in such a way that their values are like, can be made like commensurable. And this is where, I mean, basically where I'm going is that exchange of commodities presupposes abstract labor, right? This is the, if you're going to be exchanging commodities which are commensurable, you know, units of abstract labor time, basically, right? Then all of that labor on the production process has to like already be being made commensurable through this universal notion of labor, which is how this is how the two are linked. And so this is like, I think the real like political side of the abstract domination is it shows that like this like, because we're in a system, in a political economic system where commodities are exchanged. I mean, in a commodity driven political economic system, all particularistic labor is reduced to universal abstract labor. So that's the labor aspect. Does that track so far? I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And just to briefly restate what you're talking about in a way is what makes capitalism different than prior societies, where we still had a lot of the things that we take for granted in capitalism. We still had people working. We had goods being produced. We had the exchange of those goods. Like all of this predates capitalism per se. Like markets are not productive capacities, and markets are not something new. And I think what you're getting at is that there's this homogenization and flattening and universalization of labor and exchange that happens in capitalism. And it's this more subtle point and this more abstract philosophical point that allows for these metabolic rifts to be opened up. Because previously, how did you connect bat guano in South America to cotton in the south of North America, to the cotton mills in England, until all of these rifts or these shifts in different areas of the world are opened up for market exchange and this abstract market. I mean, is that kind of what you're describing?
Yeah, right. Like if we start from this, so like in the podcast we went metabolic rift to abstract domination, but if we started with abstract domination, it would be very like we would see very readily in a certain way that the implication of this is the metabolic rift, right? Like the metabolic rift is not just like some freak thing that happened like with guano or whatever, right? But like the metabolic rift is actually what is required by capitalism capitalist, like capitalist political economy, just as it reduces particular labor to this abstract, this universal abstract labor, so too does it reduce the particularities of landscape or environment, right, to this like abstract. You could, I guess I would just, I don't know, even know what I would say. I mean, like this abstract, like plane of extraction or something, right? Or, so it's actually like required, almost, of capitalism to do this, because this sits at this other bit, which is this law of competition, right? So in capitalism, individual producers, or capitalists, whatever you want to call them, factory owner A and factory owner B, are going to be competing to because their products, if factory owner A's products are cheaper than factory owner B's, then more factory owner A's products are going to be bought than those of factory owner B's. So factory owner B is going to try to make, their products cheaper, either through like increased technological methods, or like longer working hours is like a famous one from Capital. And so because there's this like ongoing like race of producers to minimize costs, what you get in the long run is this like the decreasing profit margin, usually accompanied by increase in scale. Because if you have if you're making a profit of X, but then you're continuously trying to make this product cheaper, what you're going to get over time is that you actually have, like, assuming everything else stays the same, you're going to actually have a smaller profit, right? But if you rely on profit X for like your subsistence or whatever as a capitalist, if you want to keep that number the same when the rate of profit is falling, you have to do one of two things, I guess. I mean, one is scale up the single operation that you have of, whatever your product is. And the other option would be to like, use this like hedge fundy term of like diversify, which would be to like, you have a falling rate of profit in this venture. So, your like ball of capital that you're able to glean from that is going to be less. So if you want to increase that ball of capital that you have, you're going to have to like start a new venture, and eventually, as that rate of profit falls. And then what you get is it's like this frontier. It's like competition or competitive frontier that's continually moving, due to the fact that producers compete with one another by lowering the cost of their products, which leads to falling rates of profit, and then to keep the mass the same, and then you get, it just goes on and on. So that's part of it.
It seems to me, could I add one other thing that they could do?
Yeah.
Well, maybe two other things. You can also try and like cut off. You can try and pay your employees less and cut corners to just try and further reduce costs.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Or you can, and I think this is a huge one, and this is what a lot of people see that they think is just greed, but they assume it's greed combined with successful business acumen, is what's sometimes called, Marxists and libertarians both, they call it rent seeking, where another thing you can do is get a government subsidy.
Right.
Or get a flimsy investment that makes you look good on Wall Street, so that then your stock price goes up and then more people invest. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. But the only, I was going to add, I mean, this is like maybe a fifth, or maybe it's like 4A, which is just like for a broad reading. So like subsidy, not only as like a policy, like a specific policy that says, the government will cover half your insurance costs or whatever, right? I'm thinking of like flood insurance and how like subsidies for flood insurance premiums is a major reason why, like in Iowa, we continue to farm in the floodplain, which is just ridiculous. But also the subsidy is something broad. So like arguing for like social policies that will like basically like kind of make it so that you ultimately can pay your worker less, because instead of having to spend some of a laborer's, like for the laborer, instead of them just spending their income on something like healthcare, if it's actually like subsidized in a certain way, instead of like the employer paying for it, right? The government pays for it, then you can like squeeze more out of your worker, right? So healthcare is a bad example because that makes it sound like I would almost like not argue for universal healthcare or something.
Sure.
But I think you get what I mean, in that like a broad reading of subsidy is like any way in which the actual like operating costs for the firm are reduced. So this isn't just like the direct, but also indirect subsidy. So like lax environmental regulation is a major subsidy, although it's usually not understood as a subsidy, because now instead of actually having to like pay whatever, if we went like the true cost, to use like in like ecological economic jargon, which is a whole thing. I don't really like it, but it's I guess it's useful for at least this discussion. But like instead of paying the true cost, when there's lax environmental regulations, part of that can be written off, and that the like harm of that is absorbed by the general population.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I've often heard those called externalities because
right, the externalities, but as subsidies, I mean, so like downstream subsidy,
sure,
is one way this has been referred to. Like, is the externality is a downstream subsidy, because like thinking about it in terms of water, for example, you pollute water upstream, you don't have to do anything to like, you don't have to like pay for the medical bills of the people downstream who drink it, right? And they have to pay for that out of pocket, or the government pays for it. So you as the company have this. So
sure. Or you don't have to deal with like one concrete example of this that at least they used to talk about, like the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which negatively impacts fishermen when you have all these nutrients going down into the Gulf, creating basically dead zones because there's no oxygen, because there's all this algae bloom, and then that negatively impacts the farmers. The fishers.
The fishers, yeah, right, yeah. Which this is, so this is like what I research actually, which is why like I've read stuff on metabolic rift theory and abstract domination, because basically I mean, if you so there's a I don't know, should we move to this? I guess we can move to this.
Yeah, sure.
Which at least as an illustration of these concepts. So Iowa, for example, like of the nitrogen or nitrate entering the Gulf of Mexico, 40% of it originates in Iowa, which is nuts, right? This is crazy. That there's 40%, and there. This is it's not just a random figure. Like the scientists have been tracking it for years, and they have like nutrient loading testing stations all throughout, partly because I was like one of the states that actually has a plan in place to try to reduce nutrients. It's failing, but at least they have a plan. But so this is an example kind of a metabolic rift, and I say kind of because most studies of the metabolic rift have to do with scarcity. So what you get is like in the example from earlier, cotton farmer, uses up too much nutrients in the soil because whatever they're trying to produce at, really high rates, which, then you can see the link here to like the law of competition and the falling rate of profit. But so they're trying to do this so they exhaust all the nutrients in the soil, and then you get there's a moment of scarcity, and then you get nutrients brought in from somewhere else, which like this, then the scarcity, instead of being, sorry, I'm like making hand motion, instead of the scarcity being here, when you get the nutrients from over here, then the scarcity is just over here. So most of these studies are like, it's like an idea. What I thought about this earlier, and it's like this idea of like stolen fertility, I think, is useful. So like with guano, we're stealing the fertility that was on these islands, and it goes just down the line. But with the hypoxic zone, it's actually not a moment of scarcity, but it's like a moment of excess.
Yeah, surfeit instead of deficit.
Yeah, so you have like too much of these nutrients here, but it's a waste, right? It's like a waste product. And it's so you have fields in Iowa, there's these like pipes under them that drain water out of the fields, because the whole landscape used to be swamp, and these pipes flow into streams or creeks, which flow into the river, and ultimately all of it goes to the Mississippi and then into the Gulf. So soil is depleted of nutrients. Farmer buys fertilizer, puts it on, whatever. Some of the nutrients are absorbed by the soil or the crop or whatever, and end up being transported. They enter water and are transported down to the Gulf. But it's a metabolic rift. I don't know what the term would be, because it's not actually like a rift in the sense that it's taking away. Maybe this is where the metabolic shift would be more useful, because you get all of these nutrients that go down to the Gulf and produce this problem. So I've like tentatively called this in some of my own writings, accumulation by ruination instead of accumulation by dispossession. So instead of like, we're going to enclose the commons and then profit off of it, we're going to ruin, your landscape, in this case, seascape, the Gulf, in order to accumulate capital. So it's like a slight, I don't know, like twisting of metabolic rift theory. But I think it's actually useful to think about this, because waste, I find, is actually like under-examined in terms of metabolic rift. It's also focused on extraction and mining and nutrients and all of this, that where the stuff actually goes also like disrupts natural metabolisms. But it's not like I guess it's a gap still between the natural metabolisms and the metabolism that is imposed on this environment by waste or whatever. But yeah, so anyways, done. Was just thinking about this, but it's interesting the way we think about it's telling, I guess, that metabolic rift scholarship tends to be so focused on scarcity, which is the foundation of classical economics. So I think if we shift to excess, this is something that even Marx doesn't really deal well with. Think about excess and waste.
So I feel like we've gotten down into the weeds, which is good, but would it be fair to say, just to try and summarize what you're talking about? Yeah. What you're saying is capitalism is this like all-pervasive system that an example of its abstract domination over, let's just say, America, for the sake of the argument, is farmland in Iowa. It's not financially allowed. It's also not like sort of socio-culturally allowed probably either, but it's not viable to have small-scale organic farms that are practicing closed-loop regenerative agriculture and allowing for like thriving agrarian communities. What it is just one more site where commodities are being pumped in this case, fertilizer, hybrid GMO crops, and capital highly capital intensive harvesting machines. The land at this point is so like denuded of nutrition that it's kind of like a medium. It's almost like a factory for these inputs to go in, for a crop to be grown, and then for it to be harvested and shipped somewhere else. And I'm assuming we're talking corn primarily. Is that right?
Yeah, corn. Yeah, you don't need nitrogen fertilizer for soy.
Okay, sure, because it's a legume and it'll fix.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, yeah, that's basically it. But yeah, and I mean, it's something interesting, especially with Iowa. You see this, and then in studies in like the Caribbean, there's studies of plantations that also illustrate this. But this notion of like making the particular universal. Oh, and then I have another thought that I'm going to bracket because it was something that when you were saying, I wanted to make sure I said it. First of all, the application of a set rate of fertilizer to the entire field, that's a very like visible, like literal, like a literal instance of where the particular, so like, you know, all the particularities of this field is made universal into an abstract thing. But then also like literally trying to make the landscape universal in the sense in which, oh, this is like it drains badly or it drains poorly. So we're going to like install these underground drainage pipes to create kind of, it's like wanting to create a homogeneous landscape. So that it's more like this is how this is like the landscape version, I guess, of like Taylorism, like applied to labor, right? Of like do it in this routine, and so that we're the most efficient we can be, and also like very commensurable. And this is what's being done to the landscape here. And the other thing I wanted to say was this point is right when you start talking about like, I can't remember what you said, like, but capitalism is like a totalizing system. Is that, I can't remember, or something like this.
Sure.
Or which was which was to say, or maybe it was that capitalism, this like big universal system, which was just to add that what capitalism requires of itself is that it be, or at least think about itself as a universal totalizing system. Like capitalism can only exist as a totality to itself, because otherwise you don't have, you know, otherwise like the particularities of things would exist, which would not allow for
riffs and shifts.
Well, yeah, or the capitalist mode of production, basically. I mean, you can't have a commodity, which is, you know, like a congealed amount of labor or whatever, unless like unless you have some notion of like universal labor. So like you have to always, like, capitalism sets universals for itself. But it's like, it's not like you have capitalism and then it sets the universals. It's like the setting of those universals is like inherent to the functioning of capitalism as a political economic system. So it can only function as like a universalizing totality, which doesn't necessarily mean that it can't function alongside other systems, but through real and formal subsumption, which like now we're in the weeds of jargon. Sure. But formal is where like non-capitalist like modes of production, like, you know, like peasant farming, or which is the one that I'm very familiar with, or like Anna Singh has this book, Mushroom at the End of the World, which is really great to show how like there's like this really like very particularistic form of labor in terms of the mushroom gatherers, because these mushrooms, they like only grow like, I can't remember what type of environment, but they grow sporadically. You can't like have like an organized like row by row farm of these things. But then all of the mushrooms are like weighed and priced accordingly, right? So you get this like reduction of all these particular forms of labor to this like universal form of value. So this is like formal subsumption, I guess, is like capitalism entering into an already existing political economic arrangement, and you get a consolidation of the means of production and so on and so forth. But the real subsumption is when these, like the exchange aspect of the fact that we're exchanging commodities enters the very production process itself. So this is where you'd get,
and that's when you start to get just by grid fertilizing your field or draining it to try and make it homogeneous.
Yeah, right. Or like standardizing working techniques, or like this. I can't remember if you'd read the Alex Blanchett book, right? Porkopolis.
Yeah, I read it.
Okay, yeah. So like this, like trying to like make these pigs that are just like all the same within like, you know, just like a hair degree of difference from one another, like through these just like intensive like genetic and breeding programs, because it's more efficient to start with pigs that are already like very, very similar to one another than to have some degree of skilled labor that can account, that like when, you know, processing the pigs can actually account for the differences. So this is, it's just, it's another example of this.
Well, and would it be fair to say that's why historically when capitalism was coming about, one of its biggest opponents were craftsmen and guilds who resented the idea that they would be losing their freedom and their creative autonomy, and just basically being, they felt dominated by machines and by the boss, instead of by their creativity.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say yes, but there's a but, which is that like, so like I really like William Morris actually, right? But he like, so for example, he started this press where he was like, you know, like mass-produced books, you know, like there's no there's no craftsmanship, no artisanship or anything like this. Basically, the like books as commodities. But because he's like, so like, and this is also an example. So he started this press where they would produce like just these. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. Maybe Kennecook Press. I don't remember. Do you know the press's name? I can't remember. It starts with a K, I think. But they would produce just these like really beautiful, like very artistic, you know, just like very like elegant manuscripts, you know, like really, really involved illustrations, you know, like colorful, whatever. But these books ended up like they cost like so much that nobody could purchase them, which is so ironic, right? Which basically what he was doing was like producing a luxury good. So like yes, craftspeople like probably like had resistance, but I think it had less to do with like maybe the creativity and the product and more with like the social relations of production that were involved in like, you know, like traditional like craft production. Because what you have now, like nowadays, you still have like craft workers who are who like, you know, like non-alienated labor, I guess, to a certain extent. But they don't actually like present like a real challenge, like because it's immediately recuperated already, right? Like you're producing this thing, and it's way more expensive because, you know, like skill itself has been commodified. So like skill, like skilled labor is just like more expensive, or like, you know, it's like 3 times as expensive or whatever as this like universal abstract labor. So like getting a handmade or like a hand knitted sweater or something instead of buying like, you know, whatever the mass produced one from Target or Kohl's or wherever you go get your stuff, Walmart, I guess, I don't know. Like you're going to end up paying much more for the hand knitted one, right, than for the other one, which is like, I don't know, like it's kind of like it, like there's an element of futility because it's like, oh God, like what, like then what do we do? I mean, I think craft goods are ultimately better. But like, I mean, and I guess you see this, right? I mean, to an extent, like you see it in like large scale organic, and somewhat even in smaller scale is like, because you're competing with like non-organic, like mass produced agricultural products.
Or at this point, organic industrial produced.
Yeah, industrial organic farming. Yeah, it becomes like you as a skilled farmer, you actually have to like devalue your labor if you're going to price your commodities competitively.
Mm-hmm.
Right, which is just, yeah, like I don't know what to do with that. It's the bad situation that currently exists in the world.
Yeah.
So
and sure. And in my case, it looks like making a strategic retreat from small scale farming, because I've come to realize there's no way I'm making a living off of this, even a modest one.
Right.
And I would say part of I feel very lonely in the Kansas City urban farming scene, in part because I don't think anyone else sees that because of this abstract domination of capital, we will short of some sort of like major economic crack up and or political revolution, we're never going to create the local food or the bioregional, food sheds. We can't create those when we have this price ceiling that is so low. Yeah, we just can't. And what nobody around me, at least from what I can tell, what nobody can grasp is this fact that we're not going to change the economy by growing food ecologically soundly.
Yeah, which is like it's like the farm, it's like the farmer perspective version of the like we'll change the world if we just eat better. Like this, like
right. Or we're gonna a lot of people, we need to educate the kids so they realize they need to eat vegetables and organically.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and,
which is it's it's so bad.
Because to spell it out, the assumption is that market prices are the way they are because everybody has like agreed that they're the prices. And so the reason we don't value our food as highly is not because it's subject to all of these limitations of capital. And it's not because we're chasing all these metabolic rifts trying to patch holes in the boat.
Mm-hmm.
It's because people just don't know that food loaded with chemicals is bad for them.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which is just, yes. I mean, it's right. It's again, it's back to like this like liberal conception of subjectivity, where if we were just like, if we all had perfect knowledge, like we would all like hop, skip, and jump into, like some sort of like hyper rationalist utopia. But so one thing that I would say that's revealed here is, right, like individual or like your farm, for example, and others like it, right, on their own will actually like can't do much, because like you have to, like the only way to like actually get outside, I guess, which I mean, it seems like is a goal, or maybe not to get outside, but at least to set a foot outside, would be to like it requires some amount of social organization. And I don't mean in terms like I'm not a big like planned economy person. This is like I mean, Marx talked about like free associations of producers, right? So, but like you as an urban farm trying to like grow food and sell it to consumers, right? You're not going to make enough for you to subsist, right? Mm-hmm. But if you but like if you did this and someone else like whatever like was responsible for maintaining like a canal that brought water to you, and someone else, whatever, I don't know, like produced silverware or I don't know, tables or something that you want, right? So this is how you would get it. You'd have to have some sort of social organization of multiple producers, which would basically, it would be stepping outside of that, this like law of competition, because now you don't actually have to compete price wise with others. You're like, I'm producing this, someone else is producing this, someone else is producing this. And if all of the like bases are covered, then basically that's how you do it. But I mean, this is it's the utopia sought after by Marx, which I don't think is actually like, super viable right now. But I mean, part of it would probably be like, you produce enough food for yourself or your household, that you don't have to enter into exchange relations to like subsist in that form. And then you like also work on the side, which is, I say you, but the you is like urban farmer, not you specifically. I'm engaging in my own like form of abstraction here.
Sure.
Which is like what peasant farmers have done throughout like all of history. I mean, a lot of them traditionally, and especially like now, like peasant farmers, there's a lot of literature on this in like peasant farmers in South America, like Guatemala or upland Peru or something, and they subsist enough on their on their food and whatever. Maybe they have a little bit of surplus or whatever that they sell or whatever, but then they'll also go like work part-time at whatever factory or something else, or as hired labor for the capitalist farmer maybe or something. So it's like there's ways, I guess I don't think full-scale bioregionalism is just going to happen if we just have like a bunch of organic farmers like producing their own shit together. But this like vision, I think, that's offered a lot of times by like Pollan in terms of eating, or this bioregionalism, which sounds like it's dominant in this like organic farming scene, which I don't know well, but yeah. It seems limited.
As an idea. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. But it's like asocial, right? Like there's no element of like social organization involved in this. At least that's what it seems like. It breaks down again to just like a bunch of people making choices as individuals, which is never going to actually be enough.
Right. Or it manifests as this kind of like Democrat-ish. We are at the like state level, like American state level, not like nation state level. At the state level, we're going to like enact these policies that are going to incentivize these individuals to act in a specific way.
Yeah, right. Which that's like the top down version. But right. but then like after the incentive is after the incentive, it reduces back to just, it's like mediated individual choices, right? It's the same thing.
Right. Or like influence. Yeah. And the assumption, at no point do they say, hey, maybe if we were to pull this off, and especially if a few other states were to pull this off, we would have a giant nationwide market crash.
Yeah.
Because we would have broken foundational rules of capitalism. Because what we would be doing functionally is we would be increasing the socially necessary labor time to produce our foods, or we would be asking people en masse to spend their surplus income differently.
Right. Yeah, right. And it would counteract also the commensurability, because you could still actually have a market, right?
Sure. I think some people have this idea that under socialism, markets would just be gone. And that's just not the case, even if you're
right. Yeah. Like there's a difference between capitalism and capitalist markets and just like markets as like places of exchange. Mm-hmm. Because like you having like, I don't know, like say I do like bees or something, and you do lettuce. I'm like, oh, I would love lettuce for a salad. And you're like, oh, I would love like honey. And instead of being like, okay, whatever is equal based on the price of these products or whatever, it would
I'll
be
give you 5 pounds of lettuce for 1.5 pounds of honey, because that's how we've adjudicated the relative exchange values.
Yeah, right. Well, but it might still be that, but but it would be a particularistic exchange, right? Like this lettuce has this, like it's useful to me in these ways. So it's almost like a trade that's like that takes use. It's exchange that is based on use value instead of like exchange value. Is like the gist of it, I guess. Which
and would it be fair, is part of the turn you were talking about metabolic rifts and how the conventional idea is one of like poverty and depletion.
Yeah.
And then it's harder in current critical theory to talk about metabolic rifts as like surplus of like too much of a thing causing problems.
Yeah, well, and of course these ideas are closely linked, because like the only reason an excess of nutrients in the Gulf is an issue is because it's an excess of nutrients is a scarcity of like fishable water, or or whatever, right? Like so they're closely linked, yeah. But sure. I mean, but traditionally, yeah, I mean it like materials not being where they're supposed to be is kind of like there was a material here that we took away, and that is the rift. Instead of there's a material that we sent here, and that produces like a fucked up environment.
Right.
So
it seems to me that this connects to what in a way, what I'm making an argument for is part of how capitalist economies function, and what I'm complaining about in the Kansas City food or local farming scene is part of what we have this downward push to basically say, no, you can't pay people anymore for this food, that we need the prices depressed, because if the prices were to rise, that would create other issues in the wider economy.
Right. Yeah. Right. Like you to like have like closed loop farming, right? I mean, it's not viable because of all of these. I mean, basically, solving the metabolic rift is not viable because of abstract domination, or like, I guess not solving. I mean, because remember the scare quote solve, but like closing the metabolic rift isn't viable because
or limiting
isn't viable because of this. But again, so like I remember, so when we were talking about before this, we talked about like, oh, what do you want me to talk about on this podcast? Which I don't think I've talked about anything. Just kidding. We've talked about many things.
Perhaps too many things.
Yeah, probably too many things. But like to add another is that like where this actually becomes really useful is when you have to add in like the materialist aspect of things, in the sense that like abstract domination only makes sense if you bring a materialist frame with it, because otherwise it's like, oh, what, like people are doing these things because like materially they have to, right?
And what, real quick, could you define what you mean by materialist?
So, ouch, sorry, my cat is like here. Lori shows her cat, so there's black beard. But my cat's, yeah, it's like anytime I'm on a Zoom, the cat is like, oh, I now want attention. Okay, so you asked to, what was it that you asked? I forgot.
What is materialism as a philosophy?
Materialism. So like, to me, this means, oh, this is difficult. There's lots of different ways to define this. I don't mean material. So maybe I'll start by saying what I don't mean. I do not mean materialist in the sense of like material girl living in a material world, which is like, I think the contemporary, or like in Christian circles, this notion of like, oh, we just have like to be a materialist traditionally, right? Like as a Christian is not a good thing. I do not mean it in this way. It means to have like an attachment to material things, to be like only material, like to be materialistic, I guess. But I say materialism, I mean like linked to like means of subsistence, I guess is probably the best way of framing it. So like we are material beings in the sense that we do require like to eat, for example. So I think this is best illustrated in the sense of peasant farmers in England pre-enclosure would grow food for themselves. After enclosure, they no longer have access to the commons. They can't really they can't grow their own food anymore. So they migrate to the cities and start working in factories. And like a liberal analysis would be like, well, why would they like work in the factories? Like they don't have to do this. Like, don't they have a choice or something? It's like, yes, their choice would be to like not eat, basically. So the materialist, and at least like the way I think of it, which I don't know if it's correct in like, capital M Marxist circles or whatever. But my way of thinking about like what it means to have like a materialist analysis is to like consider this bit of it like actually having to exist. I guess like I would say it's like the material conditions of existence, which is always like required, which should hopefully be obvious, I guess. And it's like, if using the materialist lens makes sense because it shows how like why people do things that don't seem to be in their interests, I guess. I mean it's one way of talking about, I guess, like the abstract domination, I think is actually linked to this. Because like the worker enters the factory and makes their labor universe, where their labor will be made universal, partly because they have to, like to guarantee the material conditions of their existence. So I don't know if it's probably a really bad explanation.
So let's talk about like this a farmer in Iowa, an abstract farmer in Iowa.
An abstract farmer, yes.
If he's inheriting family land that has been farmed a certain way, and he's been raised in how to run the combine and how to fertilize the crops, and how the elevator in the county will take his corn if he delivers it at this time, then it's not, I think you're claiming materially, it's not a ton of good to tell that guy, hasn't he thought that spraying pesticides are bad? If he's has a livelihood and he's living in a society that says this is how we farm,
Yeah.
I was once talking to a Western Kansas farmer, same one I mentioned earlier, and I suggested, how about you grow soybeans? So maybe you would just have to put on slightly less fertilizer year to year. I was basically making an argument for crop rotations. Mm-hmm. And I just said, how about you grow, and this is an extreme example of what I'm about to say, but I said, how about you grow soybean, which is not a wild idea. And the guy looked at me, and a Republican that, believes in freedom and rugged individuality and doing the right thing. And he looked at me and said, the elevator in the county takes corn.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's like a very literal example of it, actually, which is good. Yeah.
And that's not to say, yeah. I mean, where I get hung up is that's not to say like there aren't ways out, even if you're materially constricted in a lot of ways. Like I know theoretically, at least there used to be like a Kansas organic producers like co-op. And if this farmer had grown some organic wheat, potentially they could have marketed it for him. And he wouldn't have to just go to the county elevator. But it's a lot harder and a lot riskier.
Yeah, well, and then, right, so this links right to like abstract domination in the sense in which, like, why is it that the elevator only takes whatever, right? Why is it that there's not an elevator nearby that would like take what he's, planting, or like someplace where he could grow like just like fields of tomatoes, like and this has to do, right, like partly also, I mean, this is like the spatial aspect, I think, of abstract domination, which is usually talked about in terms of like capitalist temporality, and you know, why we get reduced working out. I mean, increased working hours, increased work weeks, whatever else. But I think this is like part of the spatial aspect, right? Is that it's like the laws of capital, I mean, I guess the laws of capital or capitalism, whatever you want to call it. Like in the context of these laws, it would not be viable to like have like a tomato processing equivalent of an elevator in Western Kansas, right? Like, so you get all these things, and this, I mean, it has to do with also like, I mean, there's like it's like treadmills of production, which you hear about, like you adopt this technology and then like it makes you know, that much, your production, it makes it that much more efficient. But because everybody else is adopting it also, and you have to compete with them, you now have to get the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. Otherwise you're like not going to be a profitable enterprise. And this is also an example, I think, of this materialist conditions of production as they relate to, right, like abstract domination. Because yes, of course you could like stay with your like inefficient tractor or whatever, old school, or like let's make it a more extreme example. Like instead of like the brand new like $500,000 John Deere tractor or whatever these things cost nowadays, you stay with your horse or your like oxen plow, right? But this isn't going to be profitable for you, right? And that's the abstract domination, right? Like no one is going to choose to stay with the horse and plow because basically like they would not be able to guarantee the material conditions of their subsistence if they did this. And why not? This is the question of abstract domination then. So these things are all like linked, I guess.
Right. And I guess real quick to play devil's advocate, you know, because I was raised by Republicans, the obvious answer to all this is, but is this not progress? Like, what are we complaining about? Why would we want farmers? Why would we want a ton of farmers whittling their life away, driving oxen to farm inefficiently?
Yeah, right. I mean, so this would be something that's like dismissed by Marxists as just like bourgeois or something, right? Like my immediate thing was like, why is farm labor like looked down upon when like it's probably a lot more glamorous than like sitting and like clacking at your like computer keyboard in some cubicle somewhere. So that's the first answer. The other is that like it's usually it's very, so like one of the most sorry, I'm trying to finish the thought in my head before I start speaking, I guess. One of the most like pervasive capitalist ideologies, I guess is what I'll call it, is this idea that like lowered labor time is like progress, right? Like we measure the progress of agriculture by the fact that like one farmer now feeds X number of mouths, you know, whatever, like when it used to take like 10 farmers or whatever. It's like, look how much more efficient this operation has become in terms of labor. Right. But this is
briefly in the terms of earlier in this talk, look at how much abstract labor can now be done by one person.
Right. Yeah. Right. But it's because like in all of these inputs that the farmer's getting, and the big tractor and the fertilizer and, you know, whatever the all the, you know, whatever, like the precision ag data that tells them, you know, do this here, all of these have labor congealed in them already, right? So they're able to make use of this, and so when they're farming, like the labor in these farm implements is also like
working with them.
Yes, working with them, right? So it's not just like you're one person. But it's like, but it's, I guess, so measuring efficiency in terms of like hours spent by one person, this is fairly unique to capitalism. So there's this great book by Bob Netting. Sorry, I'm looking at it. It's on my shelf. Called Smallholders, Householders, and I can't remember what the subtitle is. Smallholders, Householders, Farm Families and the Ecology of Intensive Sustainable Agriculture. It looks like this. It's really long and it's a ton of data. But what he shows ethnographically, and what Esther Bozerup had previously argued, is that in terms of labor, small scale farming is actually, yes, it's less intensive. You'll spend more labor hours per bushel harvested or whatever. But it's a lot more efficient in terms of resources and like acreage. It's like if a farmer's getting, a like traditional like industrial farmer or whatever is getting like X bushels per acre, that is actually less than what the intensive farm is getting. They get more bushels per acre, but they're spending more labor time. But like it, I guess to me, it's the sense in which part of it, like part of making like industrial agriculture seem like progress is it's linked to this idea that like labor is something we want to actually avoid, especially like these forms of manual labor, because actually like like if we're talking in terms of like subsistence, right? Like more people on farms is actually like way more efficient spatially than just like one dude with 10,000 acres and a big ass tractor. So yeah, so that's my like, which there's like tons of, so this like the netting book is, it's just like a ton of case studies that document this and show this. And it's like quite eye-opening, I think, for people who hadn't like, for people who are like, oh, but like small scale farming is just like, it could never work because like it's so inefficient compared to, large scale farming. Because every time this statement is said, the assumption is that less labor for the individual farmer is like the sign of progress, which is just bizarre. So,
and it takes for granted the people whose land was dispossessed.
Yeah, right.
The tremendous amount of fossil fuels burned to allow for this to happen.
Yes.
And the amount of specialized labor that, as you say, is like congealed into either it's that 500,000 John Deere tractor or the genetically modified seeds. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or the strain on the water use. If you want to, we should probably wrap it up soon. But
yeah,
I figure you should talk about the Ogallala because a lot of people don't know how bad the situation is, or even what it is.
Yeah. Well, so the Ogallala is this. I mean, it's a giant aquifer in the high plains.
Which is a what?
An
aquifer.
What an aquifer is, or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's underground water that's like stored kind of, it's not like a big like tank of underground water where it's just like, oh, it's like a bunch of water just hanging out. It's like stored like in like the pores and in between the cracks and in between the individual like grains of sand and the pores of limestone and all of this. And it's a massive aquifer. It's like parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, western Kansas, eastern Colorado, Nebraska, on up to the Dakotas. But it's being depleted. Like I can't remember the rate, but it's being depleted like crazily, like several feet of water. It's like cubic feet or whatever. I don't know what the measure is, but it's like several feet worth is being removed. And it's only like reproducing at a rate of like 3 inches a year or something.
So there's a kind of metabolic rift there.
So like that in itself is a metabolic rift, because you're extracting water and it's not being returned, it's not being replenished. And it's complicated partly because like it's gotten worse with climate change, that like it was fed by snow melt streams and just like general snow melt and all of this. But as things have shifted and precipitation patterns have shifted, it is no longer like being replenished. So like climate change, which is also like a larger scale metabolic rift, I guess, right? Climate change paired with like the localized extraction is why it's being depleted.
Which is that primarily for farming?
Yeah, it's like over 90%, I want to say, is for irrigation. For growing corn in like especially corn in places like Western Kansas, which there's like no real reason to like grow corn here actually. And then it goes along with like, I mean, there's a whole interesting history also, because you don't have this until you have like, yes, you have some of the extraction, but when you had gravity fed irrigation systems like flood irrigation, even if you pumped water up from the Ogallala, like it was only being used on a set amount of land, right? But now, like we've got these more efficient, like center pivot irrigations and drip irrigation systems, which are like will use less water per whatever land area unit than the old floodways, but it's actually it hasn't led to a reduction in overall withdrawals from the Ogallala, because center pivots have allowed for more like extensive use of the Western Kansas landscapes. Like they can travel, like it doesn't matter if you're upstream or downstream, because the water is pumped through the center pivot. Whereas with gravity fed, like you couldn't, like hilly landscapes wouldn't really be suitable for this. But anyway, so it's a metabolic rift, because more water is being extracted than is being replenished. But again, like the social side of this is it's not just like farmers being greedy, right? But it's because for the farm operations in this part of the world to continue to like exist, basically. So farmers, like, you know, they have to make a profit, otherwise they don't exist, is the easy way of framing it. They have to sell a certain volume of crops at a certain price, right? And the price is not set by the farmer. The farmer doesn't set the price. This is, you know, the linkage between abstract labor and exchange relations and everything else. So there's this price that is set, you know, a value is assigned to this crop that is grown, corn, whatever it is. And this low price, because it's lower than like the, you know, to use the ecological economics, the true cost, is dependent on the devaluing of Ogallala water, right? In the same way in which low price for cotton and the, like, you know, being able to like sell your cotton, like as a single operator on a farm, to compete with everybody else who's selling cotton to the textile mills, you had to sell it at the same price, right? Or lower. And you were only able to do that if you like exploited the hell out of your landscape, you know. It's the same way if these farmers are going to be able to sell their like commodity at a certain price, they've got to devalue the water. I mean, it becomes just a part of this, which leads to this other thing, which is ecologically unequal exchange, which is a lot of times linked to metabolic rift theory. But it's how like the resources in like one, usually it's in one country, are actually devalued because they're used like as like raw materials are devalued for one country as they're like exported to be used for like products in another. So in this instance, in the selling of corn at a certain price, part of the value of that is like the water that is just like extract that, like that's like free water, undervalued water, is part of what makes that corn be like so cheap or whatever. I mean that the farmers can sell it. So
otherwise it would be more expensive. And
yeah, right.
Somebody at the end of the transactional chain would have to pay for that.
Yeah, right. Which and this is where I guess where it's like where earlier what I was like, capitalism requires that it be a totality, right? Like it is it's the totality that's deciding this. It's not like you can't pin down actually like where it's being decided that corn has to be this, that this is the value of corn, because it only exists relationally, through the relations between labor and capital, basically. So and then exchange relations. So yeah, is that I don't know, is that a wrap? It's not very much about the Ogallala, but I mean some, I guess. So
but the takeaway is we're rapidly depleting it. There will be major ecological and financial consequences when it's eventually depleted, and we're not doing anything about it, but we're speeding full speed ahead to deplete it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, right. Well, because it's like I mean, you can think it's like there's a contradiction between capital wanting to continuously expand and the natural limits, right? So which this would be the natural limit is like the fact that eventually the Ogallala will just be like done. So but yeah. And sorry, last thing. And I will say it's really easy to see how this same dynamic, right, plays out. Played out previously in the Dustbowl, right? So since the title is Dustbowl Diatribes,
sure.
It was, the original Dustbowl came about through just, similar thing, over exploitation of the landscape, but not due to like individuals, but because it was enmeshed in like a political economic context of capitalist development. So
right. And this Ogallala situation, similar to the Dustbowl, there were lots of people every step of the way saying, hey, this seems like an ecologically insane thing to do, and there will be vast negative consequences.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then the smart people say, yes, we should do something. And then we all collectively don't do anything because it would require going against the grain of capital accumulation.
Right. Or we try to get more efficient, like irrigation systems or whatever else. Right.
Right.
Like the techno fix is always a part of this narrative.
Sure. That says, well, we'll keep farming this way, but we're going to reduce the amount of water we need. But because there's also this constant pressure to expand, then what that means is we just efficiently use more water. Right.
So like in Iowa where I work, where there's it's a different problem, right? Excess versus scarcity. It's the nutrient pollution issue, but it's still, it's the same thing. It's but like one of the solutions is like buffer strips. There's cover crops, but there's one that's like it's a bioreactor. It's like wood chips, where like the drainage pipes under the field would pass through this like area of wood chips, and it would like filter out through some sort of chemistry that I don't know, and the water would be good. It would denitrify the water. But the big issue around these things is that they're like super expensive. Like one of them costs like as much as a new car, like $30,000 or something. And that estimate could be way off. I don't know. I saw a number around this, but tens of thousands of dollars. And like the major thing is like, who's going to pay for this? Farmers can't pay for this. Like there's no way farmers will be able to pay for this. This is the language, right?
Which, park it right there for a second. I think we assume that if you are a quote unquote successful farmer in Iowa, farming a lot of land on a $500,000 tractor, the assumption is that these people are rich and making it because they made it.
Right. Yeah. And so you get like from the left, like tends to push this, like farmers are greedy and they just need to like take a cut to their profits and put in this bioreactor, which is like, again, there's like, this is like the traditional liberal view. And then the right wingers is like, farmers can't pay for this. But in this sense, actually, right, like the right wing view is actually more right. Because given like the structural conditions of like capitalist political economy and capitalist agriculture, like the farmer can't pay for this. To plant a cover, whether it's to do the buffer strip, to plant a cover crop every year, or to put in a bioreactor, right? It's going to make the cost of that farm operation, it's going to increase the cost of that farm operation, lower profit, everything else. And then you get into this, like, it's the materialist aspect, linked to the abstract domination of these things that are function. There's this quote from Adorno that it's like functioning like over the heads of laborers or something, which I think is really good. So like whether or not capitalist farmers like are conscious or aware of it, they are abstractly dominated abstractly dominated by the social relations of capitalism in which they're enmeshed, but are simultaneously through their actions contributing to the reproduction of those relations. So,
but concretely, when it comes to managing the runoff in Iowa, their options are, if they're gonna, let's say you're a farmer, you're gonna build this bioreactor strip. Your options are either raise the price of food, your food. And if the market will bear that, what that means is people in cities are going to have to pay more for your food, or you go bankrupt and get swallowed up by another farmer who may or may not, and probably doesn't have the money to build that bioreactor.
Or like the neoliberal environmental governments is saying that like, oh, like we'll subsidize these greatly, which then basically it's like
we'll pay you rent to be an ecological steward.
Yes, which is the rent seeking. So, which is so it's just, there's no great solution. Which it's also just a good example of like the limits of this like market forward type of environmental regulation and governance. Yeah, which I wanted to I pulled up the Postone quote, just because since I've talked so much, and I should have said this quote, but Postone refers to abstract domination as to be dominated by abstract, quasi-independent structures of social relations mediated by commodity-determined labor, which is like in one sentence, one very dense sentence, what we spent 2 hours talking about. So,
yeah, it's a lot to think about. Anything else you want to promote before we sign off?
Oh yeah. So sometime this summer, which Lori will advertise, I'm sure, on her channel as well. Her and I, and maybe Spencer, we haven't yet determined if he will agree to be submitted to the torture of hanging out with Lori and I and talking about agriculture, but we'll be I'm
not sure you can afford my abstract labor.
Yeah, exactly. I know we've got to compete with everyone and keep our prices low, so we decided we're not sure if we can have Spencer yet, but the course is titled Agricultural Biotechnology and the Information Economy, which is going to be like a short series. It's not really a course in the sense that Lori's traditionally taught, like her Christian anarchism course. But we're thinking about having a live Zoom where we read Mackenzie Wark's Hacker Manifesto side by side with Kloppenberg's Burst the Seed, The Political Economy of Plant Biotechnology, 1492 to 2000, to think about how the history of agricultural biotechnology can be kind of re-theorized or reconceptualized using contemporary ideas from like critical media and critical information studies. So if you're interested in anything like that, watch out for that course. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for talking, and I'll see you around.
Yeah, thanks for having me.